Thank you for your patience. I feel like I'm always like the last person to get this video out, but it takes me a while. I keep changing my mind. I go through my list. I deliberate. I'm like, oh yeah, that game too. I expose myself to a lot of games throughout the year just because of my day job. I do all the before you buys on GameRank, so a lot of games come across my face. So then at the end of the year, it's like I have to remember everything. And the way I make this list, it's just the stuff that stuck with me the most, the stuff I had the most fun with, but maybe stuff that just clicked with me or attached itself to me in ways I didn't expect, or just ways I really enjoyed. And this, of course, is my personal choice. Everybody has different tastes. My list is kind of weird and all over the place. And I will also say, too, that I didn't get to see every single game this year, so I might have a couple of glaring omissions, things that I am looking forward to getting to at some point. So if you have recommendations, I'd love to hear them in the comments. So let's just jump in. I got some honorable mentions too, but I have a top 10. And number 10 for me is Streets of Rage 4. This one might seem, if you've been following me for a long time, this might seem kind of out of left field for me, but I love this game. I think it's really, really great for a couple of specific reasons, because it was fun to play with somebody else, of course, on the couch. But number two, it also just kind of like reawakened that thing in me. It reminded me like, oh yeah, I am a kid of like the early 90s, and I did catch that tail end of arcades, and I had such a good time. I love beat 'em up games. I love brawlers like this. I've always loved the original Streets of Rage 1 and 2. 3 was kind of whack, so 4 wasn't on my radar at all. And then it came out in April, and I was like, whoa. The gameplay is tight. It's exactly what I was hoping for. That's pretty simple though, but the art style, the look, the vibe, everything else really sold it, where it was like kind of a modern age Streets of Rage, but still very much old school. It just like walked that line perfectly. And I just found it to be a satisfying beat 'em up. I love those types of things. I love those arcade style beat 'em up experiences. And Streets of Rage really reminded me of that. So like, I'm grateful for that. And I thought about it all year. Then at number 9, we got Crash Bandicoot 4. It's About Time. Another one that I was very surprised of. I was skeptical. I thought on paper it sounded like it could be cool. Essentially like a spiritual sequel to Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. And with the title being called It's About Time, after them figuring out their groove with the Insane Trilogy, like I was like, whoa, this could be pretty sick. And despite my kind of hate for Activision Crash Bandicoot and like how they treat him, I still thought this was pretty cool. And from a raw gameplay perspective, I really loved it. It's incredibly challenging. It really pissed me off at times. I got very, very angry at it, but I just love what it did with the Crash Bandicoot formula, because it is by now incredibly simple. But the way they kind of, would think outside the box with things and add additions, they didn't feel tacky. They didn't feel like gimmick stuff added just to justify making a new game. The mask things where you have different abilities with different masks you pick up throughout the levels, I thought wasn't going to click with me, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fun learning the ropes of every single mask, and especially with how complex they got, coupled with the level design, I was really, really impressed, especially as someone who's been playing Crash Bandicoot from the beginning. I didn't think I could be surprised, and they surprised me in some really good ways. Also, looks really cool. The art style is fun, and it's just like a lighthearted, goofy romp. There's enough in there to really challenge you and kind of encourage some replayability. And the additional characters that you play as that have their own different move sets and different types of levels, I thought I was going to hate, and I ended up loving those sections almost the most. Cortex, Dingodile, the girl, I forgot her name, but they all play very differently, and it clicked for me. I guarantee you this one you're not seeing on like any other like lists like this, but I highly recommend it if you love platformers. Next at number 8, we have SpiderMan, Miles Morales. If you know me, kids, you know I love Spider-Man more than anything. I'm super biased. Spider-Man PS4 was one of my favorite games that year. And Spider-Man Miles Morales is the same thing. I take a lot of issue with people that say it's just glorified DLC, specifically because it's simple, dude. Like, I feel like I got my money's worth, and I really enjoyed it. That's it. So I love what they did. The little subtle changes to combat were one thing. It was fine. But little changes to just quality of life, the way he kind of moves and swings in the environment, the fact that some side missions and side objectives feel way more meaningful to the building of Miles' character and just the whole thing. The fact that it's New York City in the wintertime with Christmas, with all the landmarks and everything. Like, I think New York City Christmas time is the most magical place in the world. You've seen it in Home Alone 2. You know what I'm talking about. I live it. And I thought that the whole thing just kind of was like perfect for me. They really nailed the music, they really nailed the vibe, they really nailed the culture, and Miles is an entertaining character, and the way they're building him out and the way they've developed him in this Spider-Man game universe really works for me. It's another one with some cool new spins, and they understand the character, and I loved it. I made a whole video on it. I could talk about it forever, but yeah, a very nice thing to break in my PS5, you know what I mean? Next to number 7, Star Wars Squadrons. I love this game because it's another thing. Star Wars, it's like automatically gonna be on my list because it's just, I love it, I'm biased, I don't care. And Squadrons is great. It was like a lower priced experience. It had some campaign, it had some multiplayer, and overall I thought it was a fun little package, and I'm happy to see that some people took to it and that they added a couple of things to the game here and there, because it's just fun. Mechanically, it's well built, it's fun to fly around. It's another thing, another game where I saw people throwing things around where it's like they just took the flight mode from Battlefront. Not the case. This is a full-on flight simulation type of game, and the aerial dogfight stuff I absolutely loved, especially because for me, for Star Wars, I come to Star Wars not really for the ship and space battles first. I really like the Jedi and wizardry and all of that stuff and the sense of adventure. So I wasn't necessarily super pumped for this game, but it blew me away. And part of the reason, I will admit, is because of the VR mode. I think it is a fully fleshed out VR mode, no compromises. You can play the entire single player campaign and multiplayer in VR, and it blew me away. It absolutely heightened the experience. And I think it just really clicked for me, and it felt like video game and Star Wars magic. I even like the multiplayer, and I'm not really like a competitive multiplayer fan. You know, there's some progression, there wasn't too much to it, but I found myself hopping into it every so often after the game released, which for me, for someone who has to move on to the next game so quickly, I don't do that a lot, so that's saying something. It also had Hera from Rebels and Wedge Antilles, like, come on. Next up for me at number 6 is very interesting, because for me, it was a rough year for Ubisoft games. I'm actually one of the people, I'm like a Ubisoft game apologist. I still get hooked on them. I still like a lot of them. I like what Ubisoft does, even though I understand it's like open world and I'm getting fatigued. Most of the time I like their games, but Assassin's Creed Valhalla didn't click with me, and Watch Dogs Legion didn't either. But oddly enough, Immortals Phoenix Rising really, really did. Totally hooked on it. Yes, in some ways it is very much derivative of Breath of the Wild. Essentially, it's like they took the Breath of the Wild concept, the world design, the flow of it, the open-ended nature, the climbing, the gliding, the puzzle-solving emphasis, all of that type of stuff, and they added the Assassin's Creed Odyssey progression and just mythology elements, and it worked for me. I know some people don't like the humor of this game. It's a little obnoxious, it's a little corny, and I'm usually not for it, but I found it enjoyable and chuckle-worthy. As someone who, at least paid attention to Greek mythology in high school and college, I found like some of their in-jokes with mythology pretty good. But it's the raw gameplay, the moment-to-moment gameplay. I didn't really care about the story. It's really just playing and exploring this world. Is it mindless? Yes. Was it my chill-out game where I just turned it on to hop in for 30 minutes, solve a puzzle, or find a treasure chest and fuck off and then turn it off and go do something else? Yeah, totally. But I loved it, every second of it. I wanted a couple more enemy types. The game could have been even longer, but I feel like I got my money's worth, and it kept me busy for quite a long time. And I think that marriage of the Assassin's Creed open world stuff, which I was getting tired of, but injecting a little Breath of the Wild into it, saved it, and I loved it for that. Next at number 5, something that a lot of people forget is that Ori Will of the Wisps came out this year at the very beginning of the year, and it's great. It's a great platformer. It's got a lot of heart. It's got a lot of challenge to it, and it's just got some good progression through it, good level design, clever Metroidvania style stuff, and incredible art design and music. That really hammers it home, because there's a lot of games out there that are putting out this type of design, this type of gameplay, this kind of feedback loop, but they don't all sell it with the visuals and the emotion and the tone that Ori and the Will of the Wisps had, especially considering like the first game, I was like, okay, cool, whatever. This one, I fell in love with top to bottom. And since it was one of the earlier games I reviewed in the year, it stuck with me, and I kept thinking about it as the year went on, and yeah. Coming down to number 4, I have Ghost of Tsushima, which actually, I keep debating to put it higher on my list. I love this game, especially interestingly enough, because early on, I wasn't super hot on it. It wasn't until I fully saw everything the game had to offer and completely 100%ed it and played through the entire thing. I realized that this game was just great. The more time you put into it, the better it gets. The world design and how it rewards exploration while not being obnoxious and in your face, and usually being incredibly meaningful to either the story, developing Jin, or developing him in terms of like his outfits, his resources, his katanas. That stuff really worked, and the combat was satisfying. The game is gorgeous. The samurai vibe is there, dude. I really didn't like the stealth. I thought the stealth kind of sucked. It got a little better towards the end of the game, but I still wasn't crazy about it. But like the way it worked in the story and the whole concept of like you going against your ideals and the building of this legend, man, it was perfect. I really liked a lot of the characters that you rolled across, you know, the monk and all this, but Jin's uncle, Lord Shimura, was so good. The arc that they had and the conflicting ideals and the willingness to hang on to the traditions, even to the lengths that both of these men went, I found fascinating, and I loved watching it. And by the time it ended, I was freaking glued to the screen, especially with how for a while I thought Jin was kind of like whatever, a little generic. I think by the end, man, this game really nailed all of its fronts: the combat, the gameplay, the world exploration, and the story, and really, really well woven together. Some games have issue with that, where you're doing stuff and it doesn't really make sense, or you're killing so many people where it doesn't really make sense, or you're playing a certain way and then a cutscene happens and it's different. Every single thing about Ghost of Tsushima, for the most part, all felt like it totally made sense, and it was like a perfectly put together package. Oh, but down to number 3, if we're talking about perfect packages, you know I'm going to go here. I'm sorry, they're like technically remakes. Does that count? I don't know. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 is without a doubt one of my favorite games of the year. I was so excited for it when it was announced. It was one of the first things I made to bring back this channel, actually. I had stopped uploading on this channel for almost a year, something like that. And then Tony Hawk was the thing where I was like, you know what? Time to talk about skateboarding video games. So I sat down in my chair and I'm back at it, and I haven't stopped. So it's the best. It is, for me, exactly what I wanted. I have played every single Tony Hawk game obsessively, top to bottom. I've said it before, but I think it's like one of the only games where I can actually hold my own competitively, and mechanically it is perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. It takes the elements from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, 2, 3, and 4 and kind of meshes them together with the maps of 1 and 2, which are some of the best, with some really great graphics and just updating things. It's skate culture. They kind of like blend the new and the old. They have a lot of the old soundtrack and it's playing on nostalgia, but then they carefully curated some songs, some new songs that just work perfectly with the audio lineup. And that's the whole thing, man. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, for a lot of kids my age, it got us like into skateboarding, and it also exposed us to new music. And I think it is such like a cultural touchstone for stuff like that. And I think like they totally respected that here, while also making a really good game, a really good remake that doesn't just bank on nostalgia, because it has those gameplay chops. I'm like shouting. I don't know why I'm shouting at you. I'm sorry. But like seriously, it's like the first thing I got rid of my PS4. I got a PS5. It was actually the first game I downloaded. Not gonna lie, just bust down a couple combos to test out that new DualShock controller, DualSense. So yes, I am this is my personal list. So I'm absolutely clouded. My judgment is clouded because I love Tony Hawk's Pro Skater so much. But this one made me happy, especially after the series has had so many misses and a long hiatus. Down to number 2 though, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I loved it so much. I think it's a it sounds so corny. It's like a dream come true for a lot of people who played the original, or hoped and waited so long for this remake that was announced a million years ago. It is exactly what we wanted, and then some. Final Fantasy VII. I'm a big Final Fantasy fan, but Final Fantasy VII isn't even my favorite in the series. But like now with the remake, like now it's even more up there, just because it's so special the way they did it here. And boy, how do I even go into it? So yeah, the story spin, all of that is incredible, but also just the presentation, the way they built the world, the way the world has come to life, the way it was like those pre-rendered backgrounds from 1990, whatever, absolutely perfectly imagined here. The characters like exploding with emotion and appeal, and you just hook, you want to love them. Am I a weeb? Is this like what's happening to me? I never thought it would get this far, and I like the gameplay. I thought it was a good marriage of taking some of the elements from the old game, but kind of marrying it with Final Fantasy 15's more action-oriented combat, but making it way better. I was really skeptical leading up to the fact, hearing that it wasn't like just like old school turn-based. I was like, I don't know, but after playing it, love the combat, love the story, love the characters, and love the music. The music is the best thing, man. There's not much more to say about it other than just listen to it. Even if you don't play this game, JRPGs aren't your thing. I get it. Go on Spotify, listen, do yourself a favor, listen to the music, vibe out, and get lost. I'm getting really corny, so I'm gonna stop. Number one, my favorite game of the year. If you watched my appearance on the IGN podcast review crew, you may already know this, but my game of the year is HalfLife Alyx. Now, this is rough for me to say just because I understand not everyone can run out and buy a $200, $300 VR headset. Or if you're nasty and you want the Valve one, spend like $1,000, which I don't. So accessibility, something that I do care about with video games, here it's kind of tricky. But if we are just, putting all of that aside and talking raw video game, I love this game for a lot of reasons. I love Half-Life. I remember playing the original on my busted ass PC, kind of grew up with those things a little bit, but I was never like the most mega diehard fan. I just played them and loved them. But Half-Life Alyx made me realize how much of a fan I was, just getting back into these worlds, these vibes. Even though it's in VR, it still feels distinctly Half-Life. And I'm not even talking about just because you're in City 17, but everything. From the manipulating physics and the objects and stuff, now in VR, of course, and with a clever spin, but to the puzzles, the brainy way you go about everything, that lonely atmosphere, that slightly creepy, slightly tense atmosphere, the sound effects, the enemy types, the situations you're put in, that great little dash of humor. All of it is so like perfectly recreated here to the point where it felt like they never stopped making Half-Life games and they just jumped right back in. I think this is great to see because it's like the Valve that I like. I'm not what do they make? Dota. Like, I'm not into that type of stuff, and Valve's all in on that stuff now. I'm into the Half-Life, the original Counter-Strike, the Blue Shift, all that stuff. And here it's that again, coupled with the fact that I think it is a very good introduction to VR. I think this is a killer app for VR. There's only a couple of things that I think are super hot VR. Vader Immortal, Beat Saber. Half-Life Alyx is straight up video game. It is a first-person shooter, linear adventure, like so many people want and we don't get enough of. And this one is fully playable in VR. There's a lot of options to adjust how it plays if you have motion sickness, which I do appreciate. But it also felt lengthy. It felt challenging. It was a VR game that I wanted to spend a lot of time with. I didn't go, okay, cool, I get it, and take the headset off after a couple of hours. No, I stayed in this thing. Not to mention the fact like what it does with the Half-Life universe. And it's essentially like, we wanted a new Half-Life game. We got a new Half-Life game. Technically, yes, it may be a prequel, but there's more to it. And I still think you should experience it. Watch a YouTube video to experience the Half-Life story and the vibe. But I gotta say, that gameplay is just so much fun. It's the most fun I've had in VR in quite some time, specifically this year. And you guys know I really like VR. I understand it's not for everybody. I don't think it's gonna change video games forever at this point, but I fucking love it. Especially a year where like you're just in your place. I was here and not much to do other than read books, play video games, watch movies. And everybody, I think, has one game that they're going to remember in this time period that they got lost in. And this top 10 are mine. And for honorable mentions, some things I really enjoyed, but not enough to quite cram it onto this list: Doom Eternal, Astro's Playroom, which I talked about in another video, and The Last of Us Part 2. But that's it, man. Those are my picks. So like I say, these are very personal choices. Everybody has a different vibe, a different preference of genres, experiences. So I can't wait to hear yours. If you got a top 5, cool. If you got a top 10, awesome. If you have a top 2, whatever it is, I want to hear you. Whatever game you played this year, let me know. And what do you think of my list? Is there something here that maybe you didn't play that's now on your radar? Maybe I steered you towards a couple of things. That would be cool. Thank you for a good 2020. Thank you for watching Game Ranks, my day job. I appreciate that. But thank you for coming over here and watching my channel again after it was dormant for a while. I'm looking forward to 2021. Now that we're technically in it, I'm just really behind. So I'm going to go now. I still don't know how to stop these videos. So thank you for watching. Clicking the like button, helps. I do really appreciate that. I would say subscribe and hit the notification bell because I'm not going to spam you. I'm only going to put out a video once a week or so. But thank you guys for watching. I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games.